Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirant. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So on today's Disrupt Your Career podcast, we're really delighted to welcome Anna Tavis. She's joining us from New York, where it may or may not be snowy behind that background that may or may not be real, because we never quite know on Zoom. But Anna, it's a pleasure to have you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited.
Good. Well, Anna is a researcher, a global educator, and a coach focusing on the future of work. Her passion is to develop innovative approaches to talent and organizations and help discover higher purpose for the next economy. She teaches at New York University and lectures globally. Every day, she says she learns from the networks she develops and joins. She's an academic advisor to a variety of organizations and serves on the editorial board of Workforce Solutions Review. Her book, Humans at Work, is about the new pivot towards human-centered organizations. There are reams and reams of introductions and information about you, Anna, all over the place. I could have gone on for pages and hours, but I'm hoping that that's a reasonable summary. Either way, we know we've got somebody with us who's wise, who's seen a lot, who's done a lot, and whom we're very happy to be welcoming. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Let's start with your own career journey. As we were preparing for this interview and thinking about all those reams of information, what really struck us is the extent to which you have yourself personally navigated an extraordinarily diverse and global career in academia, in business, and consulting. Can you tell us more about the journey you've been on? And did you start professionally with a vision of what you wanted to do? And how did you decide to switch from one profession to another?
Yes, that's an excellent question. I don't think any career has sort of an off-the-shelf template. And in fact, when I was navigating my own career, it was kind of unique, as you described, that people shifted from one area to another, one way of working in consulting, in business, and then coming to academia, et cetera. But I think it's becoming more and more common. And in fact, oftentimes I'm finding myself being sort of less adventurous as some of the bios that I'm looking at now. So if it is of any help, I actually started in academia. I was very committed to learning languages, history, literature. I was a linguist in my undergraduate education, which really opened up opportunities to interact, to learn languages, to connect to people from so many different backgrounds. And I think that that's fundamentally, Claire, that's what's been driving me throughout all of these different official jobs and official opportunities that I've been pursuing. For example, with the languages, I got my PhD from Princeton University in comparative literature, believe it or not, looking at the European intellectual history, especially in psychology and sociology, comparative cultures, et cetera. And then I decided to transition into international business because that was the place where at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of activity. It was kind of like the first stage of globalization, the downfall of the the end of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall came down, and all of this dynamic activity. And I would say business was where it was happening, but it was happening on the very human side of people transacting, creating businesses across borders. And that's where my linguistic skills were very needed, as well as the ability to translate one business culture to another. So that's where I made that pivot. But I think fundamentally, and I don't even know how to talk about careers that way, it's not a series of boxes, right? A career is not a series of boxes. And sometimes people say, you know, follow your passion. I think follow your passion regardless of your job. If you are, you know, excited about, you know, the creative side of what you could do, or athletic or whatever, find time to pursue it regardless of whether it makes money or not at some point. At the same time, don't just assume that whatever you do is going to create income for yourself. So be able to manage multiple identities of yourself, but don't give up on your passion as much as do not give up on earning your living. You know, it's kind of have a responsible relationship with the outside world at the same time. Share your passion, because that's where you're going to, and this will be a running theme through this conversation, this is where you're going to excel. This is how you're going to connect to people. This is where you're going to build relationships. That's where you're going to find sponsorships. That's where, as I would say later, you're going to find mentors that are going to help you navigate most obscure professional opportunities. It all comes from people, and you connect to people through passion. I don't know if it's a particular formula for professionals, but I would say develop an ambidextrous relationship with the outside world, where you are both passionate about something and you at the same time skilled in something, and juggle those two at the end of your career. As it happened to me, it will all converge. I'm now both making a good living at the same time. I am just absolutely thrilled about what I do day to day.
Ditto. And I know that Antoine feels the same. That convergence is very important. If we drill right down into sort of very early career professionals, you know, you've had this long path. You talk about mixing passion with skills and, you know, working towards that beautiful convergence towards the end of a career. Of course, the challenge for very early career professionals is that they don't have any skills, or they don't have any itemized skills that they can necessarily show up with, and they may not yet be clear about what their passion is. So what's your message to very early career professionals who are looking to start out? What particular advice would you give them beyond what you've already talked about in terms of passion?
Yeah. People often ask me, what's the most important, if you were to identify one most important thing for early career professionals, I would say, get yourself a mentor. Yes, you can absolutely go learn the skills. You can join different organizations, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this is a series of steps, but which direction to go that will be aligned with who you are, because that's the only way you're going to succeed. Mm-hmm. It's somebody who is going to look at you from the outside with your interest in mind. And I'm not saying necessarily a coach. I make a distinction between a mentor and a coach. Yep. A coach is going to drive you toward a particular skill, and in the direction that you're already willing and wanting to go, for example. But a mentor will look at the holistic you and say, Claire, you know, with who I see you are going to be very well placed in this one. And for that, you need to develop these skills. You need to go to this particular school. You need to make a pivot, start there and just get through it. I know it's not going to be the most exciting part, but you got to get it done before you get to the next stage. And kind of taking that holistic outside view of yourself. It's not going to be your parent. That much I can tell you. Because your parents will love you wherever you do. And sometimes it's actually not helping you at all, because they're going to, you know, support your passions to the point where, you know, you are unemployed and playing the piano somewhere in the basement of their home. That's one thing. And you absolutely need that emotional support and trust and questioning that the parents bring. But the mentor, professional mentor, is almost the number one priority. When I look back at my career, Claire, the reasons I was able to make all of those pivots and succeed in the long run is because I connected to the right people who I felt very trustful of, and who actually helped me with all of those opportunities. Because otherwise, if I left it to AI and recruitment systems and et cetera, I mean, I would be disqualified from pretty much every single move in my career that I've made. But because there were people behind it, because there were people who were having my best interest in mind and really cared about my success, so I attribute it to humans above and beyond everything else.
Wonderful. It's very, very true indeed. Let's turn now and look at something completely different. It's linked to your career. It is your career, but it's looking from a functional point of view. You've had many different roles, either in or around HR. You've been at the heart of the HR function, both in your editorial work and in your corporate work. So you're very well placed to observe how HR as a profession has evolved over the years. So if we were to ask you today to take the temperature and give us your sort of critical evaluation of how HR is doing today, what would you tell us about the progress that's been made, where there are still opportunities for improvement? And, you know, what's also your advice to HR professionals who may want to reinvent themselves?
I think we're midway to where HR could be, to that pinnacle of professional perfection or professional standing in among other functions in the business and other organizations. Because, you know, the point is that HR is everywhere, which we often forget. We're so focused on corporate HR, but forget that HR is at the United Nations, HR is in the government, HR is in nonprofits doing, you know, a really important work around the world. So I think that's kind of what attracts me to HR so much, that it's people are everywhere. I mean, every activity we have is about people. So where we are, I think we as a profession, and I am, you know, right in the middle of it. I don't say, look, I'm not saying it looking from the outside in. I'm standing with my fellow HR professionals and saying, let's together evaluate, you know, the journey we are on. I think we've been through kind of the worst, the lowest point in HR, where HR was just a purely administrative function. However, that past often haunts us, right? At least some of us. And I think the emphasis today on technology and data and a really fine-tuning on much more discernible skills and competencies of HR, everything from data analytics to technology introductions. A lot of the things that we do are now digitized and put on platforms, which allows us to achieve scale. All of it is kind of what I would call the technocratic side of HR that is being elevated along with, you know, all the other functions. Marketing, as everyone knows, has been ahead of us for quite some time, et cetera. So we are kind of in the recognition stage, where we were kind of in a servant stage. Now we've been recognized as the function that actually delivers and looks after the most valuable asset in their organization. And I think that the pandemic actually accelerated that process of recognition. But we are not, and that's what I will argue in my book that we will talk about, we are not where we could be. We have not achieved it, because we're now walking around proudly celebrating the fact that we're a technocratic function, that we have the tools, we can code. Guess what? And I always tell my students, I absolutely require all of my students to code. All of my students take analytics classes. All of my students understand how technology works in organizations. But at the same time, you know, we are not, this is not our core skill set. This is a skill set that gets us then to the next level and allows us to be even more human and provide that insight, that value to the organizations that are now really looking at their workforce from a very, very different vantage point, especially with the pandemic. Now, with the Great Resignation happening in the US and Western economies, I think most companies are taking stock of what they've done and why they've taken their people for granted. At least we got to this point, right? How we're going to get to the next, where I think the 21st century is going to be from the business perspective, is going to be the century of HR as a profession. If we can rise with the battery of skills that we will bring in, but also with the information that we're getting and understanding of human behavior and empathy that it takes for us to develop the collaborative, the innovative, and the kind of the most advanced organization that's possible, I think that that's where we're heading toward. So just to sum up, you know, we kind of were administrative, and some of us still have that chip on the shoulder coming out of that history. We got the technocratic phase where we could be proudly walking around and say, I can code, I can look at data, I can see the evidence that tells me, et cetera, what to do. I think the next phase will be with all of that evidence, with all of that information, with those hard skills. How do we make our workplaces human-centric? How do we make our workplaces work for the human race? The question and the urgency around getting to this point is, if we do not step up, if we do not bring our very special set of expertise in human behavior, technology is going to take over. And it's not necessarily going to be good for any of us. I really think we are at this pivotal point where it's going to be either we're going to create a society that's going to be designed around humans and human needs and with human expectations and values, or we're going to have robots running the universe, and with a very small group of elites who are going to be, controlling their robots. So I really think there is a dystopian and there's a utopian side to where we're at. And I think that HR's role is to make sure that we are driving ourselves in the right direction. I know it could be a little bit high level, but that's how I'm thinking about it.
Excellent. And that obviously brings us on to, the book.
Yeah.
The book that's going to be published in late March. It's going to be called Humans at Work, The Art and Practice of Creating the Hybrid Workplace, which you co-authored with Stella Lupushor, and will be on the bookshelves, we assume, as you've said, at the end of March. So you've talked quite a bit, I guess, about the compelling need that you felt to write it. You feel very strongly about this dystopian versus utopian evolution that we're inevitably going through. What practical advice beyond the sort of, learn coding, get these tools mastered, what practical advice do you offer organizations for them to become more human-centric?
Yes. I think it's in addition to the hard skills, technical skills, there's a whole line of thinking, and there's a whole series of practices that have evolved in other areas of human activity or I don't want to just limit it to business, that have already, again, preceded the HR function, and we're learning from them. For example, the whole idea and the importance of design. You know, everyone knows about design thinking, but believe it or not, I think the HR profession should get out of the silo and start talking to our colleagues across different functions. For example, I always bring to my classroom architects. I love having conversations with designers and architects, including those who design our technology, because, you know, the interaction and crossing the silo, you know, firewalls between these disciplines is the future of how we collectively, collaboratively are going to, you know, create that workplace. Our specialty is in human behavior, right? I think HR at the end of the day, yes, there are all of these transactional aspects, but scientifically, our foundational sciences are all human sciences, anthropology, sociology, psychology, neuroscience right now is coming in again with all the tools. So that's the whole aspect that we can bring in, and we need to bring it to the workplace. So design of the workplace, and design as it applies not only to the physical spaces, which are very, very important, but also how do we design the work itself? What is work? You know, we talk about in the chapters on work, we talk about how to design work differently, even from the point of view, do we need the discussions that are happening now? Most importantly, it's remote or, you know, remote or on site, right? That's kind of the central conversation. But if you think of hybrid, hybrid can apply to anything. How much of it is going to be working for one organization or working in the ecosystem where you could be part-time working, doing one thing and then being engaged in 3 other different activities that can also bring you income and bring you relationships, etc. So that kind of design of what we call in the book 4 W's, design of work, design of workforce, design of workplace, and then understanding worth. Those 4 W's, 4 different areas of work need to be thought together. And so architect is one thing, technologists another, user experience is really what's driving a lot of how we conceive of employee experience. That's replacing talent management today. In terms of workforce and how that is changing, you know, do we need full-time people all the time, right? Do we, what about robots coming in? Their hybridization is happening as well. We are moving toward a world where there's not going to be this kind of repetitive mundane work. That could be, how do we work with robots? You know, learning to work with robots, and what does that mean to us? Workplace, we talked about it. And in addition to remote or on site, there's a metaverse that's emerging. How are we going to work in the metaverse? What are the rules of the road? You know, all of those decisions will have to be made. And my point is they have to be made with the humans at the center, because otherwise we can drive that technology to where it takes us. And sometimes it doesn't take us to the places where we want to go. And the final one is worth. We are also reevaluating what the work is worth. Is it worth 9 to 5? Is it worth to spend my time doing something that it just earns me the upkeep? Or you know, I was talking about with some of my Chinese students, and they're still talking about 996, which is an absolutely brutal schedule, as you know, in China, from 9 till 9 at night, 6 days a week. You know, there are some of those regimes are still there, and there are people who are now beginning and have been arguing for a long time. Do we need a 5-day work week, right? Let's think about working when it makes sense. So all of those elements are in play. This is why I think it's a pivotal point for us to step in and say, let's rethink all of it with the human interest in mind.
Wonderful. That's a beautifully long but very complete answer about the way humanity needs to stay in and be reinvented, reimagined. Let's drill down into a particular topic that we have in common, which is that of hidden workers. You wrote a recent blog article on LinkedIn and an article in HBR a little further back. These hidden workers, we can define them as those worker segments that have been earlier screened out of the labor market as some sort of result of the bias in long-standing management practices and recruitment systems. These include, for example, veterans, former felons, caregivers, or older workers. This is a topic that's really close to our heart as well. Antoine and I have long advocated for tapping into these potential alternative talent pools. And yet we know the reality is that companies aren't doing it very much as they stay prisoners of their legacy, traditional HR processes. What practical steps, in your view, could companies start to take to pivot their talent approach and open up these untapped reserves?
Okay, that's also a topic that I care really deeply about. In fact, as you mentioned that I live in New York City, and we just got a new mayor here. And we, from where we are in academia, New York University, we are connecting to the city hall, to our local government, to actually, in addition to just writing about it, to actually get engaged with those organizations that the city also cares deeply about and looks after and funds, that allow for a much more, dynamic exchange between the employees in the city and those hidden worker populations that are multiple in a diversity like ours. So I think, to everything I just say now, I am actually in the middle of this big project experiment where we are looking at multiple ways to do it. So there are two things that I think it's important to keep in mind. First of all, this is not a malicious intent oftentimes, right? What we find, and myself having worked in Fortune 50 corporations in financial services and technology, I realized that those people were just off the radar. So there are a lot of challenges that need that the company's systemic challenges and the structures that have been created for recruitment purposes that are getting in the way of bringing those people in. And oftentimes, we actually, in trying to solve for it, and that's where the government comes in, et cetera, they're looking at the supply side of it. And they're saying, let's train those people, let's give them skills. And there's investment going on into that side. Where I think, and where HR needs to play a role, where it was overlooked, is on the demand side. Even though employers are looking for people, for talent, for workers, their systems are prohibitive of bringing those people in. So I think the work, then what practically we need to do is work on both sides of this divide. Those organizations that are now training people, giving them skills, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we are working also on the employer side and educating HR, educating recruiters on how to bring those people in and actually have them stay. Again, that's where HR comes in. What is the experience of those people? It really links up very closely with the inclusion initiatives that we have. And I'm glad that attention is being paid to that, because I think the main issue after we passed sort of the very basic skills level is the social cohesion and ability of those people to actually function in, the workplaces that are out there. Everything from the discipline of showing up to work, being self-driven, meeting goals, et cetera, et cetera. So there needs to be from the organizational perspective, different support systems that are set up as a ramp up sort of stage for those workers to come in, feel that they belong and stay and continue to grow. So that's where we're now focused on that sweet spot, because we're feeling that there's a lot that's being invested in skills development. We, for example, are partnering with one organization in New York City. It's called Here to Here. They're working with 11 high schools in the Bronx, which is the primarily minority areas. And they're providing those students with training. But can we ensure that there are some corporate mentors, for example, who are going to be bringing these people along and when they join organizations? So I think it's a collective effort, and the organizations shouldn't assume that just because they train those people, they're going to bring them in. They're just going to be flying through their careers. There's a little bit more of a ramp up that's needed from all of us. I think in the long run, it's going to be rewarded.
Definitely. I think, yeah, a little bit is undoubtedly an understatement, but it's an extremely rich source of new talent with different life experience, different perspective. And that's where the real value of diversity and inclusion comes in, isn't it? Not just quotas, but value of perspective and experience.
I totally agree. We kind of started with, at least in the US, with racial diversity and gender, but I think it will be expanded. It's now becoming a much broader topic. And even though we haven't made as much progress as we expected to, but I think we're learning. I'm very optimistic. We're learning along the way, and we're not even, I haven't even mentioned disability, for example. That's another area. Older workers, disability.
The list is so long at this point.
In the US, the estimate from that study that there are about 27 million people who are left out of the employment opportunities because of all of these various barriers that they experience. And that's a significant number. And obviously, given the shortages that we experience now in the work and, declines in birth rates, et cetera, that's a real challenge that the employers are going to experience, even with all the robots that we're going to bring in.
Absolutely. That's a chilling number, actually, 27 million. But okay, that's the challenge we've got in front of us. Now let's go way back. Let's go way back to 17-year-old Anna. You've had an incredibly varied walk through life. If you could go back to 17-year-old Anna and give her some advice, what would it be?
It's really hard to go back to how I feel, how I felt in 17. I think it is about perseverance. I think it's not that I needed something to change. On the contrary, I think what was really incredible about, how looking back, I just had this, and I know there's mixed reviews on that, but real grit. You really need to expect nothing, that the world is kind of delivered to you on the platter, but hard work is so critical. And now I'm looking at my students, for example, and it's a good reminder to me. I will take a hardworking student who is persistent, maybe coming in with a much lower skill level in the beginning, but the work ethic, the commitment, the passion that they bring, in the long run, they always do much better than somebody who comes in with a lot of attributes that already are in place, but without that ability to pursue what they are in, what's in front of them, pursue goals, and with some level of sacrifice. I think that one of the troubling thing with some of the generations that we've noticed, the current students coming in is, that whole idea, this kind of consumerist idea that everything is going to be, if I don't like it, I shouldn't be doing it. And I think that there's a hard part to any glamorous profession you're pursuing. And if you're not willing to take all of it and have the stamina to do the hard part and unglamorous part, then you're not going to succeed in the entirety of it. That's kind of my approach in the long run. I mean, and I've seen some spectacular derailments of most talented people who you would think were given everything, but because they took all of that for granted and didn't develop the skills to persist, to overcome challenges, and they as a rule, they do not sustain that success throughout longer periods of time. So I think the most valuable thing you can continue to cultivate in yourself is that persistence, is that hard work that you bring in. And I know it's not, it doesn't sound very sexy to a lot of people, but in the long run, it really is where the success is. I think psychological research and a lot of what we understand from, the current neuroscience as well, that's what this hardwiring leads to a much more successful outcomes.
Persistence pays off. We know that, that's for sure. Anna, we could go on for hours, I'm sure, but I suspect it's time to start wrapping up. Is there anything else you would particularly like to share with our listeners before we finish up?
Yes. I mean, if we're talking about HR profession, one of the things I want my colleagues to, cultivate is the creative and innovative mindset. I don't think we often look back and see what are the rules, what are the right things to do, the right skills to learn, and all of that is absolutely really critical. However, the future is going to be with creators. And one of my challenges to my students in HR and my colleagues is let's tap into that creative side of HR. What do we bring? How do we reimagine the profession and allow ourselves to come up with those images of organizations, with those structures, with those new ways of working, with new workplaces that are going to be creative? And it's not going to come from just pure following the rules, right? The rules are absolutely important. I'm not an anarchist. I respect the rules. However, there's got to be a time and place for us to be fully human, which also means to be fully creative, innovative, as well as collaborative and well-networked. So that will be my recommendation, because I think that third stage in the evolution of the profession is going to be a much more creative, much more rewarding stage for us than just purely being administrative or technocratic. It's going to be creative.
Wonderful. I love the idea of finishing on this notion of creativity, because it opens up so much possibility for what comes next in people's minds, in your work, in our work. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that too, Anna. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on board with us today. Some of our languages coincide, some of them don't, but I want to say danke schön. I want to say большое спасибо. I want to say thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure hearing all the little relics of your accent as you've gone through the talking. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you cover so many different angles of a fascinating subject.
Thank you so much, Claire. It was a real pleasure. We have to have these conversations much more often as a profession. And thank you for doing this work as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.